As the war enters its 930th day, here is the situation on Thursday, September 13th, 2024. Before updates, I request everyone to please subscribe to my channel to get daily updates on the war. Subscribing and liking the video will motivate me to create more detailed videos. I would also request everyone to please suggest the topics you would like to see. Thank you all for visiting. Coming back to updates of 13th September. The Ukrainian Air Force said it shot down 24 of 26 Russia-launched drones overnight over 5 regions, according to a statement posted on the Telegram messaging app. Pentagon spokesman Major General Pat Ryder said Russia's counter-offensive against Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region is marginal at this stage. Ukraine has accused Russia of using strategic bombers to strike a civilian grain vessel in a missile attack in the Black Sea near NATO member Romania. Romania's Ministry of Foreign Affairs called the attack an unprecedented escalation by Russia in its war against Ukraine. Ships from Russia's Northern Fleet have fired cruise missiles at targets in the Barents Sea as part of the Ocean 2024 Navy drills, the Ministry of Defense said, using Vulcan and Onyx anti-ship missiles at a range of about 200 and 180 kilometers, or 124 and 111 miles, respectively. Diplomacy. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and United States President Joe Biden will meet in Washington, D.C. on Friday and are expected to discuss whether to let Ukraine use Western-supplied long-range missiles against Russia, something that Kyiv has long been pushing for. Vyacheslav Volodin, the chairman of Russia's State Duma, the lower house of parliament, has accused NATO of being a party to military action in Ukraine, suggesting it was already heavily involved in military decision-making. Starmer told reporters en route to the U.S. that Russia started this conflict. Russia illegally invaded Ukraine. Russia can end this conflict straight away. Ukraine has the right to self-defense, according to British media reports. Russia's FSB security service said the accreditation of 6 British diplomats had been withdrawn for suspected espionage and for threatening Russia's security. The head of Russia's Security Council, Sergei Shoigu, met North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang, weeks after the two sides signed a defense pact. U.S. hints at allowing Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia, enraging Putin. There was a faint glimmer of hope in the past week for Ukraine, that after months of pleading with Washington, it may be starting to move the strategic needle in favor of allowing deep strikes inside Russia using weapons made in the United States. Until now, the U.S. has allowed Ukraine to use its weapons for counter-battery fire at short range across the border. When asked if he would lift geographic restrictions, U.S. President Joe Biden on Tuesday told reporters, "We're working that out right now." On the same day, his Secretary of State Antony Blinken told reporters in London that he and British Foreign Secretary David Lammy will be listening very intently on this and reporting back during a joint visit to Kyiv this week. Biden and British Premier Keir Starmer were to discuss the issue on Friday. "We have continuously adjusted and adapted based on battlefield conditions," Blinken said. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCaul went further. He believed Blinken would actually deliver the news to Ukraine that restrictions were lifted. "What I've seen and what I've been briefed on, it looks like that's the message they're going to give them, that they can use them cross-border," McCall said. "It sounded promising to me." These statements amounted to a change of tone from Washington after months of insisting there would be no change in policy, something U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin repeated on Friday, saying the 300-kilometer range, 185-mile Army tactical missiles Ukraine wants to use inside Russia would not change the course of the war. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday said that if NATO countries authorized strikes deep inside Russia, they would effectively be involved in the war. This is not a question of allowing the Ukrainian regime to strike Russia with these weapons or not. It is a question of deciding whether or not NATO countries are directly involved in a military conflict, Putin told Russian state TV. If this decision is taken, it will mean nothing less than the direct involvement of NATO countries, the United States and European countries, in the war in Ukraine. This will be their direct participation, and this, of course, will significantly change the very essence, the very nature of the conflict. Western weapons have been used since the beginning of the war to sink Russian ships, strike Russian artillery down Russian planes and take out Russian tanks. NATO countries have also provided the Ukrainian armed forces with target coordinates. But Putin said NATO personnel would now be programming flight paths into NATO-built missiles, and that marked an escalation. Would Russia go nuclear? Western self-restraint has been underpinned by a fear of Russia using nuclear weapons. But on Sunday, CIA Director William Burns poured cold water on Moscow's threats. Putin's a bully. He's going to continue to saber-rattle from time to time, Burns said, seated beside the head of Britain's MI6 in London during a media event. We cannot afford to be intimidated by that saber-rattling. Russia had already passed the moment in the war when the usefulness of tactical nuclear weapons was assessed and dismissed, he said. There was a moment in the fall of 2022 when I think there was a genuine risk of potential use of tactical nuclear weapons, Burns said. I never thought we should be unnecessarily intimidated by that. A successful Ukrainian counteroffensive recaptured at least 8,000 square kilometers or 3,090 square miles from Russian occupiers in the northern Kyiv region in late August and early September of 2022. On November 9th that year, as Ukraine rapidly advanced along the Dnipro River, threatening to cut off some 30,000 Russian troops on the right bank, Russia pulled back from 1,170 square kilometers, or 450 square miles, in the southern Kherson region. Russia also lost more than 700 square kilometers, or 270 square miles, in the eastern Donetsk region. General Ben Hodges, a former commander of U.S. forces in Europe, agreed with Burns's assessment. Ukraine's counter-invasion of Russia last month could legitimately have triggered a nuclear response in accordance with Russian military doctrine, he told Al Jazeera, but it didn't. Here we are now, 2.5 years since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and 10 years since the original invasion by Russia, and we have crossed multiple red lines. Ukraine is inside Russia and Russia is not able to do anything about it, Hodges said. So I'm hoping that this will begin to erode some of the excessive fear in the White House and some other capitals. Hodges said there was no place along the front line where a nuclear weapon would create an appreciable military advantage to Russia, and said Russians don't have the troops that are trained and properly equipped to properly exploit contaminated battlefields. In addition, he said, it would isolate Russia diplomatically and economically. The Chinese and the Indians have told them not to do it. The US president has said, catastrophic consequences if you do it, he said. I think the Russians would use a nuclear weapon if it looked like the motherland was about to be destroyed. Like if there was a huge invasion or the threat of a huge invasion by NATO. That's been their doctrine for the longest time. For the Russians, the benefit is continuing to use the threat. This is all intended for Western decision makers. Russian diplomats have issued warnings in recent weeks that the US was reconsidering its restrictive license on US weapons. The West is asking for trouble, Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, recently said.